with the MVP season we got from Lamar Jackson and how this Ravens team is really going to favor and pan out with a stacked AFC North. I'd say it's honestly the biggest bloodbath division in football. So to really discuss it and locked on the Baltimore Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher joining us. Well, Kevin, I mean, there's no better way to explain, the AFC North and just the state of this because, I mean, the Browns just extended JOK. They're keeping their defense locked down. Pittsburgh walks in now with a quarterback because they don't want to look like they're mediocre at that position. And then there's the Bengals with Joe Burrow bleaching his hair. I mean, the Ravens got pretty much a handful going into this season, right?
Yeah, this division to me is the best in football. I wouldn't be shocked if all four teams came out with 10-plus wins because that's just how it feels this season, especially with the Ravens being the best team in the regular season last year. They obviously lost some pieces, but they did end up coming back with Derrick Henry to bolster their run game even more than it already was. But you're right. I mean, Cincinnati getting Joe Burrow back is a big deal, bleached hair and all. And then you have Pittsburgh with their quarterback situation. Cleveland, it all kind of hinges on Deshaun Watson, it feels like, and if Nick Chubb can come back at full strength. But, man, this AFC North division is going to be tough this season, and it kind of makes it difficult to pick a winner because of just how talented every team is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And especially because I got everything. I've got quarterback, I've got offensive weapons, I got a defense. And, all these coaches, I mean, yeah, Mike Tomlin's never lost a season. And you got Kevin Stefanski, who worked with literally no quarterbacks, and yet they still ended up with 11 wins. So it's like there's such quality coaching up in there. So recapping with the Ravens, because in your honest perspective, I gotten a couple of, I've listened to both stories up on this when it came to the MVP race. I love Lamar Jackson, and I feel like you get a quarterback who's winning you 75% of your games, and especially with how elusive and how he really distributes the ball. I mean, the guy hardly loses, and you could tell with how this offense flows with him, where some on the other end, they were talking about the MVP race, and they felt like, well, Josh Allen had a shot. Christian McCaffrey had it. In your defense with the MVP in Lamar Jackson, what's kind of the best way you can really properly detail it for our audience here and really kind of get a perspective what that looked like in that MVP race?
Yeah, I think for Lamar, there's always a conversation for him about his passing statistics because with the quarterback position, obviously you expect guys to throw for 300, 350, 400 plus yards a game. You got the 3 passing touchdowns in there. And that I think is what makes a lot of people's MVP when it comes to the quarterback spot. But Lamar is more of an eye test quarterback when it comes to those numbers because he can go 15 of 17 for 200 yards, throw 2 touchdowns, and the Ravens can win by 30 points. And I think that is when you talk about most valuable player, Lamar is a guy in that offense that isn't asked to throw 35 times a game. It's a run-first offense, and that's why, to me, I think in the national scene, Lamar gets punished for his rushing ability because he's a quarterback. He has to throw the ball, right? That's what he has to do. But I don't care, Jake, if you run the ball for 6 yards or throw the ball for 6 yards, you're getting 6 yards. If you run the ball in, you throw the ball in, you're getting 6 points. So I don't really care when it comes to that type of thing. I think it's a testament to Lamar that he can be so effective both with his arm and with his legs. So obviously there were arguments for a lot of players last year for MVP. Lamar obviously was one shy of having his second unanimous in the league. That award, there's only been 2, Lamar back in 2019 and Tom Brady. But it feels like to me with Lamar, you have to kind of take him at face value, but then go beyond the stat sheet a little bit. Talk about efficiency in those numbers. And I also think with Lamar's playoff narrative, people, it's, Lamar with these playoff stats, why is he winning MVP? The MVP is a regular season award. And during the regular season, Lamar, to me, was the best player in the league. You can throw Tyreek Hill up there, right? I think, in the NFL top 100, certainly said Tyreek was number 1. And I don't dispute that whatsoever. I'm not mad at that selection. But I think to me with Lamar, he might not throw over 300 yards a game. He might not have 5,000 passing yards per season, but he makes the Ravens exponentially better. And you mentioned it right at the top there. the Ravens win games and they win them by a lot of points with him at the helm. And because of that, he also takes a lot of quarters off. Fourth quarters, he's not up in there. He doesn't get the opportunity to go and throw for more passing yards. So it's definitely it's a multi-tiered argument for Lamar every single season, because he is not, he's breaking the mold of what a quarterback is. Still has great arm talent, but obviously there's a lot more to him as well.
Yeah, and I've always said this because like our good friend Cam Newton, when it comes to game changer and game manager, I always say that, look, if you're able to manage with both running the football and throwing it as well as Lamar Jackson does, and yes, he throws the ball so well for a running back talent, as most people would think, but he just really manages the game in such a different way. And I think with how Todd Monken really has managed this offense, I think this is one I'm excited for, because Zay Jones, another year on his belt now. Mark Andrews, which, by the way, thank God he's okay, because for the news we got, that's pretty immaculate. He got out of there with not a scratch or any of that, but to have him back, and then Isaiah Likely, I think this Ravens offense really is going to pick up where they left off. Now, defensively, this is quite a challenge, knowing in the division, and as much of a gritty type of division it is in the AFC North. You lose a defensive coordinator with Mike McDonald going to Seattle. You lose Patrick Queen going to the enemy territory in Pittsburgh, and then there's Geno Stone going to Cincinnati. So before I get into that draft pick, because I want to know a little bit more on your thoughts on it, but when you look at the defense as a collective, and from a collective scale, this is a team that never gives up in any given Sunday at all. They play their hardest 110%. Do you think this defense will be fine because of just the subtractions we got this offseason, and how you really kind of see this playing out?
I do think they'll be okay. And you can't understate the losses. Obviously, Baltimore's going to have to rely on a lot of young talent to come in there, because they didn't go out there and replace a guy they lost with a veteran 1-for-1 every single move. This is kind of the year of promotion for a lot of these younger players. They drafted Trenton Simpson out of Clemson last season. He kind of took a year behind Roquan and Patrick Queen. And then now he's stepping into Patrick Queen's role. You mentioned, we'll talk about Nate Wiggins a little bit more, but he's the guy that's going to have to step up for Ronald Darby, Odafe Owe, for Jadeveon Clowney. It's all these younger pieces that are going to have to elevate their games. And on a contending team, that certainly can come with some risk if it doesn't pan out the way that you particularly need it to, because vets are kind of the, sure thing, where not every vet pans out, but they've been there, they've done that, they have that experience relying on guys who haven't had a ton of playing time. There can be a bit of a learning curve. And speaking of, Jake, you mentioned it with Mike McDonald. I think a lot of people here in Baltimore feel like that was Baltimore's biggest loss this offseason, where he was such a talented coordinator here in Baltimore. Obviously, went up to Michigan for the season with Jim Harbaugh before coming back to Baltimore to take on the defensive coordinator role with John. But he really found his groove. And there was really, as the season went on, as the playoffs went on, there was that feeling here that, okay, this is probably the last stand. And that's why I think the championship game stung so much, was because the roster felt perfect, the coaching staff felt perfect, and they couldn't end up getting the job done. Now they go internal. They bring in Zach Orr, who's a first-time ever play caller, any level. He's never called plays before at any level. Did play for 3 years with the Ravens. He was an all-pro in his final season before retiring due to a neck injury. But there is some risk in that as well, where I think by the end of the season, we'll be talking about this defense as a top 5 unit at the minimum again. But the Ravens have to open up against the Chiefs in the opening game of the season. They have Dallas in their first 5 weeks, Buffalo, Cincinnati. The defense will be fine because, again, while people are looking at the Patrick Queen loss and Jadeveon Clowney and Geno Stone and all those are big losses. But I think in some circles, they're being talked about like they lost Kyle Hamilton and Roquan Smith and Justin Madubuike. And they haven't lost those guys. Those are kind of the lifebloods of the defense. And by the way, if you want to become the defensive coordinator of the Ravens, just be the inside linebackers coach, because these past 5 promotions have been from within, all of them. So that's the job I'm applying for next, actually, is because I know what my path would be. My promotion would be up there, but they love the system. That's why they moved internally. I don't expect much of the system to change, just to add on Zach Orr's personality and kind of acumens into it is what I think is going to be the biggest shift for that unit. I don't expect them to be the same unit they were. I mean, that was a historic level defense we saw last season. They broke multiple different records. And I make this comparison, when Lamar won his 2019 MVP, that first one, a lot of people said, well, okay, now he has to improve statistically every single season or else he's regressing and he's getting worse. And I said, well, from a stats perspective, he threw 36 touchdowns, had 6 interceptions. You can't expect the stats to go up every single season. Like Jake, 65 passing touchdowns per season for Lamar, throwing like 0 interceptions per season. The efficiency got better, but some of the stats regressed. I expect that same path for the Ravens defense this season. I expect their efficiency to be better with some of their younger players, but they might not break the franchise record for sacks every single season from now on. Again, I think we got to be realistic with the whole situation as well.
Oh, absolutely. And talking about the top draft pick, Nate Wiggins, I mean, the way that I broke it down, because I had top 10 draftees coming in this year that I think really are going to be a fun watch, interesting to kind of see how they develop into an NFL level kind of caliber. And the thing I broke away with Nate Wiggins is that you're not going to look at a guy that like a Quinion Mitchell, who is basically a ball hawk, that's going to be there going and getting the interceptions. But what I got was, this is a guy who acclimates so well to man-to-man coverage, a guy that will, even if you get passes deflected and all the rest of it, it's good enough because it's only pissing off the opposing offense, especially your receivers. But I felt like that week 1 preseason was a pretty impressive showing. I mean, the guy showed that he is much like what Baltimore standard is, plays hard, pisses off opposing offenses, and he just gives you that kind of energy and vibe. How do you really break down Nate Wiggins here and plugging in with Marlon Humphrey and this Baltimore secondary?
Yeah, I think this was a needed addition. Corner was certainly on the list of needs for the Ravens, and this is kind of what the Ravens do, where an immediate need, it wasn't, because you had Marlon Humphrey, you had Brandon Stevens, like you mentioned. But this is what the Ravens do, is they go off of their board and best player available. And so you slot in Nate Wiggins, and they love running these 3 cornerback rotations on the outside. So with Humphrey, Stevens, and Wiggins, those 3 will be able to rotate in with whoever Baltimore's slot corner is. The speed is what pops out about Nate Wiggins, though. Sub 4.3 at the 40. He's a guy that has incredible recovery speed as well. He does get beat sometimes. Every corner does. But the difference with Nate Wiggins is he's able to recover faster than most cornerbacks in the league. So when you talk about how these offenses are being built today, Jake, it's about track team. These guys accumulating all this speed on the offense. I mean, the Ravens will have to see it in week 1 with Kansas City, with some of the guys that they got, Xavier Worthy, etc. You want to have a guy in their defense that can be able to catch up with those guys, work with those guys, and not be mismatched in those situations. So Wiggins is a tough player. He plays with physicality. He's a competitive guy, has that swagger to him. He'll talk. He says he loves the whole trash talk element of it, which he's put on full display over the course of training camp and the preseason so far. The thing with him, though, is the frame. He's a little bit on the slender side, doesn't have the biggest frame in the world, and I think that's what everybody's talking about here, is that in the NFL, you got to put on some weight to be able to hang with a lot of these other NFL wide receivers. But the thing that he and the Ravens will have to, I guess, determine, this will probably be an offseason question for next year, but what weight do they want him at? What weight does Nate Wiggins want to be at? Because if you put on the weight, obviously you don't want to lose the speed. There has to be a happy medium and a balance of what does Nate Wiggins feel comfortable playing at. But for this season, I expect there to be some problems with maybe bigger and stronger receivers, but he'll have no problem staying with guys. And again, he goes in there, he makes tackles, he wants to be involved in run support. And we had another corner here in Baltimore, Marcus Peters, all those years ago, it feels like, he was also that like slender, slighter frame guy. The difference is that he made business decisions. He didn't want to be involved in the run game. He sometimes let a guy run past him. Sometimes he wasn't involved in a play. Nate Wiggins doesn't play like that. He has that competitive fire. And so I expect him to fit right in. He had a great preseason opener, and I think that's one of the bigger storylines of the NFL over the first week of the preseason. But again, it was the best player available selection for the Ravens, and I expect him to contribute over the next handful of years for them. And especially if he can get going during his rookie contract, it's a pick that I think will pay off in the long run.
Two questions here for you before letting you go. So you open up with the Kansas City Chiefs, and we know last time being here in this setting, that was a stinger. And I found myself questioning because watching the Ravens play, they ran the football once and then didn't even turn to what was working for them all season long. So there's a lot of that question mark. Now we come into week one against Kansas City, knowing there is revenge in this game, and there is one that they are really trying to take notice on, that Kansas City, like, this is a team that's obviously got a ton of targets behind them. How do you really preview this week one? And does this game itself really kind of redeem them, and how important will it be facing against the defending champs?
I think, to me, I mean, everybody talks about the revenge. For me, I think the revenge would come in the playoffs for this Ravens team. But the week one matchup is where you have to start because, I mean, the way that the season ended last year was such a disappointment. And look, Jake, if we see 6 running back carries again in this week one game like we saw in the AFC Championship game, I don't think it's going to be a very pretty sight in Baltimore. But here's the thing. You can't do that with Derrick Henry. At least I don't think you can. I guess if you wanted to, you could. But Derrick Henry's the X factor here for this offense because we know that Zay Flowers is hopefully going to have a great year this season. And I think actually with the Chiefs, what we saw last year was it wasn't the offense that carried them in the regular season. It was the defense. And their regular season, by many people's standards, was a lot lower than people thought it was going to be. It wasn't as good as people thought it was going to be. But what mattered was they were the best team in the playoffs, and that's why they won the Super Bowl. But the interesting part here is Marquise Brown, who obviously is a former Ravens, signed with Kansas City in the offseason. Again, does not look like he's going to be available for that game. Obviously, it's possible, but with the injury he suffered, that timeline is looking a little iffy there. So that brings it down to Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy on that Chiefs team. Obviously, the big matchup, though, that I'm looking for, Kyle Hamilton versus Travis Kelce, I think is going to be absolute fireworks for the entirety of the game. We saw that during the AFC Championship. And one underlying story is, I don't know if you saw this or remember it, Jake, but beginning of the AFC Championship, before it started, Justin Tucker and Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes had a little dust up when they were doing some warm-ups. Justin Tucker was trying to warm up where the Chiefs were doing their warm-ups. Kelce and Mahomes kicked the gear, threw it aside. And so there might be this game has all look. The NFL got it right here, in my opinion, with this Kansas City Baltimore matchup. I think this is the matchup everybody wanted to see. Obviously, if it wasn't Kansas City, San Francisco, or one of those other matchups. But to me, the Ravens know who they have to go through. And I know everybody talks about, oh, it's one game at a time. No game matters more than the other. But I'm sure, Jake, this team has the Chiefs game circled in bright purple on their calendar saying, we know what time it is here. But again, if they make it to the playoffs and there's a rematch, I think that is where the Ravens will understand, like, we have to get through this team. We know that this is the last step for us. And obviously with Lamar Jackson, him being 27 years old, every year that they don't make the Super Bowl, every year that they have a disappointing season, it wastes another year of his prime. And we're getting to the point where it's like with any quarterback, right? How many more years do you have with a guy? For Lamar, could be 5, could be 10. We don't know. But that's the thing. You don't know. So you want to maximize it when you can.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, it's called not for long with the NFL, because usually a lot of this stuff, it doesn't last for long. And in the end, you got to start thinking way ahead and thinking about the future, you know? And so I agree with you. I think the NFL really did get this right. And this is why the NFL's king. This is why the viewerships go up. The sports betting goes through the roof. I mean, I know I live here in Denver now, but living in Vegas, when the sports books would be lighting it up, I mean, everybody's there watching these matchups and hoping they're winning big, you know, this week. So finally, kind of previewing this division. Now, unfortunately, my co-host not being here, but he's a diehard Cleveland Browns fan, but he's very reasonable about it. He gets excited about the AFC North so much this year. So knowing with how powerful that the AFC North is, like I said, the Steelers, they knew, we're not walking in the season with a mediocre quarterback. We need to get one. It didn't matter what we need to get, but we need one. And then all these other teams as well. How do you preview this AFC North, and how do you preview the Ravens record this upcoming 24 season?
Yeah, to me, this division, again, and we talked about it at the top, it is so talented. I think to me, the biggest boost for any team will be Joe Burrow coming back. And I think that's pretty obvious. I mean, he's a star quarterback. And they were able to make some noise with Jake Browning in there, but obviously Jake Browning is not Joe Burrow. I do think, though, the intriguing team to me is Pittsburgh, and we don't know what the Brandon Ayuk situation looks like. Is he going to stay in San Francisco? It seems like it's really down in San Francisco and Pittsburgh, but if he does go to Pittsburgh, that's a big get for them, because I don't, here in Baltimore, Jake, we have heard forever how this Ravens team has the worst wide receiver group in the NFL and they can't do all that. But Pittsburgh, to me, it's George Pickens, and I don't know who the heck's that. It might be Van Jefferson at this point. I don't know who it is. So I think, to me, they needed something, anything other than Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky. Just any slight upgrade, because that defense is so good. Mike Tomlin works his magic every season. And while the Russell Wilson experiment was a complete failure in Denver, and Justin Fields obviously didn't work out in Chicago, that's a pretty sizable upgrade from what they had last season. And I think that speaks to just how bad their quarterback play was. So Baltimore is a team that I think, to me, is still my pick for a division winner. But I honestly see it in a tiebreaker situation where it's going to come down to something like Baltimore and Cincinnati have the same record, but it comes down to conference or division record in that extra tiebreaker on top of it. I think Pittsburgh will not be far behind. And then Cleveland, I think, will still be good. But to me, it all hinges on Deshaun Watson, and he hasn't really shown anything outside of that one game against Baltimore in his 2 years in Cleveland to show that, does he have any of that Houston magic left in him? Because Cleveland's defense is incredible. They added Jerry Jeudy to that wide receiver group. But if they don't have the quarterback, I mean, they got Joe Flacco magic last year, and it was better than what they saw from Deshaun Watson. So, I mean, if that doesn't kind of tell you where he was or what he was doing in Cleveland, it hasn't been great. So this is going to be a much different AFC this season. We saw quarterback injuries run rampant last year, and Baltimore didn't really have to deal with that with Lamar being able to stay healthy. But with a lot of those quarterbacks coming back, I still expect Baltimore to win the division, but I'm going to say it's going to be a 12-5 record for them. It will be a harder path, but I think that will mean they're more battle tested for the playoffs, which sometimes can be a really good thing.
Very impressive stuff, man. I mean, like I said, between you and also previously on my show that I had Engraven from Engraven Bids, man. I mean, you guys are putting in the best quality content up out there for getting me ready for Ravens football. So I cannot wait. This NFL season is just so stacked. I think it's by far the largest I think we've ever had in previous years watching the NFL. I think because new waves of quarterbacks, new waves of just different style of play, rule changes. I mean, the NFL is just going to be, it's going to be unbelievable. I think this is going to be a great 24 season. But appreciate you, Kevin, for stopping by. Where can people find you? And, of course, getting locked on those Baltimore Ravens.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me, Jake. This was a blast. You can find me over on Locked On Ravens. We do Locked On content over there, of course, for the Ravens 5 days per week. So you can subscribe over on YouTube. You can follow along anywhere you get your podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. I also write over at the Ravens Wire for USA Today for my written content. You can find my written work over there. I also do video content with Bleacher Report. So if you want that, it's over on the Bleacher Report app. And then on the Ryan Ripken Show, we talk Orioles, we talk Ravens, NFL, all sports. So I'm very entrenched in the Baltimore sports community here, but at least both teams are good now. Usually it was the Orioles would be bad, then we'd just be like, where's Ravens season? Now the Orioles have led us up into Ravens season very nicely with how good they are this year.
I'll tell you what, man, if the Orioles season, if they get as far as they do, that's got to be some extra added juice to give for the Ravens for them to really go off this season, if that's the case.
Yeah, the Orioles visited Ravens practice today. So, I mean, they do a lot of cross stuff together. I'm sure, the Orioles, if they're a playoff team, which I expect they will be, obviously, I'm sure some Ravens people will be out there. So it's a fun time to be a Baltimore sports fan, Baltimore sports creator, man. It's awesome.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate you coming on by. Enjoy the rest of the week, and good luck to the Baltimore Ravens this year. I'm excited because I just think this AFC North is going to be a complete bloodbath, but it's certainly going to be a division well worth watching. Appreciate you, man. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.
You too, Jake. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. See this, guys? We've just been stacked all night long with great interviews. NFL season around the corner. I can't get enough of it. There's just so much of just NFL